The Holloway disappearance. In the quiet town of Marlow Creek, nestled between pine forests and forgotten highways, the Holloway family, James, Elaine, and their two children, Sophie and Ben, vanished without a trace in the summer of 1997. Their house was found unlocked, dinner half-eaten, the TV still humming. No signs of struggle, no goodbye notes, just silence. The case baffled investigators. The Holloways were well-liked, had no known enemies, and lived a modest life. Rumors swirled. Alien abduction, witness protection, cult involvement. But nothing stuck. Over time, the town moved on. The house was sold, the files shelved, and the Holloways became a ghost story parents told their kids. Until 2025, a man named Carl Jennings, a retired postal worker, was cleaning out his late brother's storage unit in a nearby city. Among the dusty boxes and old furniture, he found a sealed wooden crate labeled Holloway, Do Not Open. Inside was a collection of VHS tapes, journals, and photographs, none of which had ever been seen before. Carl turned the contents over to authorities. What they uncovered was chilling. The tapes showed James Holloway documenting strange occurrences in their home. Objects moving on their own, whispers in the walls, and shadowy figures appearing in mirrors. His final tape, dated July 3rd, 1997, showed the family preparing to flee. "They know we know," James whispered. "We're not safe here. If anyone finds this, don't trust the house." The journals revealed that James had uncovered a secret about the land their house was built on. It had once been the site of a Cold War-era psychological experiment. The government had buried it, but James had found the records. He believed the house was being used to test mind control frequencies. He claimed they were being watched. The last photo in the box was of the family, standing in front of a cabin deep in the woods. Behind them, barely visible, was a man in a suit. No face, just a shadow. Investigators followed the clues and found the cabin. Inside were signs of habitation, clothes, toys, and a wall covered in newspaper clippings about their own disappearance. But no bodies, no Holloways. The case was reopened. The town was shaken. And the question remained, did the Holloways escape something sinister, or were they silenced for knowing too much? In the summer of 1997, the Holloway family was the picture of suburban serenity. James Holloway, a civil engineer, had just completed a major infrastructure project for the county. His wife Elaine taught literature at the local high school, known for her love of Gothic novels and her gentle demeanor. Their children, Sophie, age 9, and Ben, age 6, were bright, curious, and well-liked in the neighborhood. They lived in a modest two-story home on Pine Ridge Lane, surrounded by tall oaks and quiet neighbors. Nothing about their lives suggested chaos, danger, or secrets. On July 4th, the Holloways were expected at a neighborhood barbecue. They never arrived. At first, neighbors assumed they'd changed plans. But when no one saw them the next day, concern began to spread. Elaine hadn't called in sick to school. James missed a scheduled meeting. The children didn't show up for summer camp. By July 6th, a neighbor named Ruth Callahan contacted the police. What followed was one of the most baffling investigations in the town's history. When officers entered the Holloway home, they found no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked. Dinner plates sat on the table, half-eaten. A glass of wine had spilled on the carpet, but not cleaned. The television was still on, playing static. Upstairs, the beds were unmade, and Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit lay on the hallway floor. It was as if the family had simply stood up and walked out mid-evening, never to return. The initial investigation turned up nothing. No fingerprints other than the family's. No signs of struggle. No blood. No ransom note. Their car was still in the driveway. Their bank accounts untouched. Their passports were in the drawer. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The police combed through nearby woods, questioned neighbors, and even dredged a nearby lake. But there was no trace, no witnesses, no leads. The media descended on Marlow Creek, turning the Holloway case into a national obsession. News vans parked outside the house. Psychics offered theories. Conspiracy forums lit up with speculation. Some believed the family had entered witness protection. Others thought they'd joined a cult. A few whispered about alien abduction. But none of these theories held water. The Holloways had no known enemies, no debts, no criminal ties. They were, by all accounts, ordinary people living ordinary lives. As weeks turned into months, the case grew colder. The police eventually closed the active investigation, citing lack of evidence. The house was sold to a young couple who moved in and tried to ignore the whispers. But strange stories persisted. Lights flickering, voices in the walls, objects moving on their own. The couple moved out within a year. The house sat vacant for a decade after that, gaining a reputation as cursed. For the Holloway relatives, grief turned into quiet despair. James's brother, Mark, spent years trying to uncover clues, hiring private investigators and scouring old records. Elaine's sister, Margaret, kept a candle burning in her window every night. But as time passed, even the most devoted began to lose hope. The children's birthdays came and went. Holidays passed in silence. The family became a memory, frozen in time, unsolved and unresolved. What made the disappearance so chilling wasn't just the lack of evidence. It was the eerie stillness of it all. No screams, no alarms, no final phone call, just a house left behind, as if paused midlife. Investigators later described it as the most intact crime scene with no crime. It was as if the Holloways had been erased, not abducted, removed from reality, not relocated. And yet, there were whispers. A neighbor claimed she saw a black van parked outside the house the night before. Another swore she heard a child crying in the woods. But none of these accounts could be verified. Over time, they were dismissed as false memories, shaped by fear and folklore. The Holloways became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told around campfires and sleepovers. But the truth, as it turned out, was far stranger than fiction. And it would take 28 years, a forgotten box, and a man cleaning out a storage unit to finally crack open the silence in the weeks after the Holloways vanished. Marlow Creek was gripped by a strange kind of stillness. The town, once bustling with summer activity, children on bicycles, neighbors tending gardens, barbecues filling the air with smoke, seemed to pause. Conversations grew hushed. People locked their doors earlier. The Holloway house, once a cheerful home with wind chimes and flower beds, became a monument to unease. No one walked past it without glancing over their shoulder. The local police, overwhelmed by the lack of evidence, began to retreat from the case. After the initial media frenzy, reporters packed up and left, chasing newer stories. The Holloway file was moved from the active desk to the cold case cabinet, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Detectives who had once sworn to find answers were reassigned. The lead investigator, Detective Marla Keene, retired early, citing burnout. Her final note in the file read simply, "No logical explanation." As the investigation faded, so did the public's memory. New families moved into the neighborhood, unaware of the house's history. Children played in yards again, though they never ventured near Pine Ridge Lane. The town's newspaper stopped running updates. The Holloways became a footnote in local lore, a mystery too unsettling to dwell on, too unsolved to forget. Their names were spoken less and less, until they were little more than echoes. But for those who had known them, the silence was unbearable. Elaine's sister, Margaret, kept calling the police every few months, hoping for news. James's brother, Mark, posted flyers in nearby towns, even years later. He created a website dedicated to the case, filled with theories and timelines, but it drew little attention. The comments section was mostly spam. The silence wasn't just from the authorities, it was from the world itself, as if the Holloways had been erased from collective memory. The house itself became a symbol of that silence. After the young couple who bought it moved out, no one wanted to live there. Realtors stopped listing it. The windows gathered dust. The garden withered. Teenagers dared each other to peek inside, but few did. Some claimed they heard whispers from the attic. Others said they saw lights flicker at night. Whether true or imagined, the house seemed to breathe with the weight of absence. Years passed. Technology advanced. The world changed. But the Holloway case remained frozen in 1997. No DNA hits. No sightings. No confessions. Even the FBI, who had briefly reviewed the case, found nothing to pursue. It was as if the family had stepped into a void. The silence became its own kind of answer, an answer that offered no comfort, only dread. In 2007, a local historian named Peter Lang tried to revive interest in the case. He published a short book titled Vanished: The Holloway Mystery, compiling interviews and theories. It sold a few hundred copies. In it, he wrote, "The most terrifying thing about the Holloways isn't that they disappeared. It's that no one seems to care anymore." His words struck a chord with some, but the silence persisted. Even tragedy, it seemed, had an expiration date. Margaret Holloway eventually stopped calling the police. Mark Holloway shut down the website. The family's remaining relatives moved away from Marlow Creek. The town, eager to shed its haunted reputation, rebranded itself as a gateway to nature, promoting hiking trails and birdwatching. Tourists came and went, unaware of the story buried beneath the soil. The silence wasn't just passive, it was cultivated. And yet, beneath that silence, something stirred. A question left unanswered. A truth left buried. The Holloways hadn't just vanished. They had been forgotten. And in that forgetting, something darker had taken root. The silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. It was a sweltering afternoon in late June 2025 when Carl Jennings stepped into the dim, dust-choked storage unit his late brother had rented for over 2 decades. The unit was tucked behind a row of abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of a neighboring town. Forgotten, like so many things that time swallows. Carl wasn't expecting much. He was there to clear out old furniture, maybe salvage a few tools. What he found instead would unravel a mystery that had haunted Marlow Creek for 28 years. The unit was cluttered with relics of a life paused: rusted bicycles, boxes of vinyl records, faded photo albums. But one item stood out: a large wooden crate, sealed with thick nails and marked with a single phrase in black ink: "Holloway, do not open." The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. Carl paused. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. He pried the lid open with a crowbar, expecting old clothes or forgotten heirlooms. What he found chilled him to the bone. Inside the crate were several VHS tapes, a stack of handwritten journals, and a bundle of photographs wrapped in twine. The tapes were labeled with dates ranging from May to July 1997, mere weeks before the Holloway family vanished. The journals were written in a hurried, obsessive scrawl. The photographs were grainy, some torn, others stained. Carl didn't know what to make of it, but something about the crate felt wrong. Not just old, tainted. He took the contents home, unsure whether to contact the police or simply toss them. That night, curiosity won. He dusted off an old VCR and inserted the first tape. The screen flickered to life. It was James Holloway speaking directly to the camera. His eyes were tired, his voice low. "If you're watching this," he said, "we're already gone." Carl froze. The man on the screen looked terrified. Behind him, the house appeared normal, but the atmosphere was anything but. The tapes revealed a descent into paranoia. James documented strange occurrences in their home. Lights turning on by themselves, whispers in the walls, mirrors reflecting things that weren't there. He spoke of being watched, of signals coming from beneath the house. He believed they were part of an experiment, something buried, something dangerous. "They know I found the files," he whispered in one tape. "They're coming." Carl couldn't sleep. He read through the journals next. They were filled with diagrams, newspaper clippings, and coded entries. James had uncovered records about a Cold War-era psychological testing facility that once operated near Marlow Creek. He believed the house had been built on top of a decommissioned site. The journals detailed his attempts to expose it. Letters to journalists, calls to government offices, all ignored. They erased the past. One entry read, "Now they're erasing us." The photographs were the final blow. Most were mundane: family outings, birthdays, school plays. But one stood out. It showed the Holloways standing in front of a cabin deep in the woods. Behind them, barely visible, was a man in a dark suit. His face was obscured, his posture rigid. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't supposed to be there. Carl stared at the photo for hours, unable to shake the feeling that he was looking at something forbidden. By morning, Carl knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He contacted the local authorities, who initially dismissed him. But once they viewed the tapes, everything changed. The case was reopened. The Holloway file was pulled from storage. Detectives who had long retired were called back in. The media returned. And Marlow Creek, once quiet and content in its forgetting, was thrust back into the spotlight. The discovery of the box didn't just reignite a cold case. It shattered the illusion of closure. It proved that something had happened in 1997. Something real. Something terrifying. And whatever it was, it had been buried intentionally. The silence that followed the Holloway's disappearance had not been natural. It had been manufactured. And now, the truth was clawing its way back into the light. The box Carl Jennings discovered was no ordinary container of forgotten memories. It was a time capsule, sealed not to preserve, but to conceal. The moment investigators pried open the lid, a wave of unease settled over the room. Inside, the air felt heavier, as if the box itself had absorbed the tension of the past. The contents were meticulously arranged, almost ritualistic. 6 VHS tapes, 3 leather-bound journals, a bundle of photographs, and a manila envelope marked confidential, do not release. The VHS tapes were labeled with dates spanning from May 14th to July 3rd, 1997. Each one bore a title in James Holloway's handwriting: Disturbance, Signals, The Mirror, Elaine's Dream, The Basement, and Final Entry. Investigators watched the tapes in chronological order, and what they saw was deeply unsettling. James had been documenting strange phenomena in their home. Objects moving without cause, static bursts on the radio, and a persistent low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from the walls. In one tape, James recorded Elaine waking from a nightmare, drenched in sweat, whispering about voices calling her name from beneath the floorboards. In another, he placed a mirror in the hallway and filmed it overnight. The footage showed fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures moving behind the glass, figures that didn't appear in the hallway itself. The most disturbing tape, The Basement, showed James descending into the crawlspace beneath the house, where he claimed to have found a sealed hatch. The camera flickered violently, and the tape ended abruptly. The journals were equally haunting. James's entries began as rational observations, notes on electrical anomalies, sketches of the house's layout, and references to local folklore. But as the weeks progressed, his writing grew erratic. He described dreams of being watched, of waking up in places he didn't remember falling asleep. He wrote about Elaine speaking in languages she didn't know, and Sophie drawing symbols that matched declassified government documents he had uncovered. "The house is listening," he wrote. "It's not just haunted, it's alive." One journal contained a detailed timeline of events, cross-referenced with local seismic activity and unexplained power outages. James believed the house was built atop a buried facility, one used during the Cold War for psychological experimentation. He cited obscure military memos and referenced a project called Echo Chamber, which allegedly tested the effects of low-frequency sound waves on human cognition. According to James, the Holloways were being used as test subjects, and the experiment had never truly ended. The photographs added another layer of dread. Most were family snapshots, birthdays, school plays, vacations. But several were taken inside the house, showing strange distortions. In one, Elaine's reflection in a mirror appeared to be smiling, while her actual face was neutral. In another, Ben's eyes glowed faintly, though the lighting didn't explain it. The final photo was the most chilling. The family standing in front of a cabin in the woods, with a tall, faceless figure lurking in the background. The figure's presence was subtle, almost easy to miss, but once seen, impossible to forget. The manila envelope contained copies of letters James had sent to journalists, government agencies, and university researchers. Most were unanswered. A few were returned with vague denials. One letter, addressed to a now-defunct military contractor, was stamped "Received" but bore no reply. James had annotated it with red ink. "They know. They're watching." The envelope also contained a map of Marlow Creek with several locations circled, places James believed were connected to the experiment. As investigators sifted through the box, a pattern began to emerge. The Holloways hadn't simply vanished. They had been documenting something. Something they weren't supposed to see. Something that had been buried, both literally and figuratively. The box was a warning, a record, and perhaps a cry for help. But it was also incomplete. There were references to other tapes, other journals, and a second box, one that had never been found. The discovery of the box didn't just reignite the investigation. It changed its nature. What had once been treated as a missing persons case now carried the weight of conspiracy, psychological manipulation, and possibly something supernatural. The contents suggested that the Holloways had uncovered a truth too dangerous to expose. And in doing so, they had triggered a response, one that erased them from the world but not from memory. And so, the box became the centerpiece of the reopened case. A relic of fear, a puzzle with missing pieces, and a whisper from the past that refused to be silenced. James Holloway was not a man prone to hysteria. By all accounts, he was logical, methodical, and deeply grounded in reality. But the tapes and journals found in the box told a different story. One a man pushed to the edge by forces he couldn't explain. His warnings, scattered across grainy footage and frantic handwriting, were not just cries for help. They were breadcrumbs leading to something far more sinister. In his earliest recordings, James appeared calm but concerned. He spoke of subtle disturbances, lights flickering at odd hours, static bursts on the baby monitor, and a persistent hum that seemed to pulse through the walls. He initially suspected faulty wiring or environmental interference. But as the days passed, his tone shifted. "It's not the house," he said in one tape. "It's something inside it. Something watching us." One of the most chilling entries in his journal described a night when Elaine woke up screaming, convinced someone had whispered her name from beneath the floorboards. James wrote that he searched the entire house, even the crawl space, but found nothing. Still, the whispers continued. Sophie began drawing strange symbols in her notebooks, symbols James later matched to declassified military documents he had uncovered online. "She's seeing things," he wrote, "things she shouldn't know." James's warnings grew more urgent. He began documenting patterns, times when the disturbances peaked, locations in the house where the hum was strongest, and moments when the mirrors seemed to reflect something other than reality. He placed tape recorders in every room, capturing faint voices that spoke in fragmented sentences. "They're testing us," one recording hissed. "They're watching through the glass." In one particularly disturbing tape labeled Elaine's Dream, James filmed his wife recounting a recurring nightmare. She described being strapped to a chair in a sterile room, surrounded by men in suits who spoke in reverse. She said she could feel her thoughts being pulled from her head, like threads unraveling. James didn't dismiss it as a dream. He believed it was a memory, implanted or recovered. "They're not dreams," he said. "They're transmissions." His journals revealed a growing paranoia, but it wasn't baseless. James had uncovered documents referencing a Cold War-era project called Echo Chamber, which allegedly tested low-frequency sound waves on human subjects to manipulate perception and behavior. He believed their house had been built atop one of these testing sites, and that the experiment had never truly ended. "We're part of something," he wrote. "Something buried. Something still active." James tried to warn others. He mailed letters to journalists, researchers, and former military personnel. Most went unanswered. One reply from a retired engineer simply read, "You're not wrong, but stop digging." James interpreted this as confirmation and a threat. He began sealing windows, disabling electronics, and sleeping in shifts. "They want us quiet," he said in his final tape. "They want us gone." The warnings weren't just about the house. James believed the entire town was complicit, either knowingly or through silence. He wrote about strange behavior from neighbors, unexplained visits from utility workers, and cars parked outside their home at odd hours. He suspected surveillance, manipulation, and a coordinated effort to erase their existence. "We're being erased," he wrote, "not just physically, historically." His final tape, dated July 3rd, 1997, was the most haunting. James sat in the living room, eyes hollow, voice trembling. "If anyone finds this," he said, "don't trust the house. Don't trust the silence. We're leaving tonight. If we make it out, we'll find a way to expose this. If we don't, remember us." The tape ended with static, followed by a single frame, a blurred image of the family standing at the edge of the woods, looking back. James Holloway's warnings were not the ramblings of a madman. They were the desperate documentation of a man who saw too much, too clearly. And now, decades later, those warnings were finally being heard. AS investigators pored over James Holloway's journals and tapes. One thread began to emerge with disturbing clarity: the suggestion that the Holloway home was built atop a decommissioned government testing site. James had uncovered fragments of documents, obscure references in county land records, and cryptic memos that pointed to a Cold War-era project known only by its code name, Echo Chamber. What began as a theory soon took on the weight of evidence. Echo Chamber, according to James's notes, was a psychological experiment conducted between 1962 and 1974. Its purpose: to study the effects of low-frequency sound waves on human cognition, perception, and emotional stability. The project was allegedly run by a now-defunct military contractor under the guise of geological research. James believed the facility had been buried, literally, beneath layers of concrete and silence, and his house, unknowingly, had been built directly above it. One journal entry described James's discovery of a sealed hatch in the crawlspace beneath the house. He claimed it was welded shut and surrounded by strange metallic wiring. He tried to open it, but was met with resistance, both physical and psychological. "I felt dizzy," he wrote, "like something was pressing against my thoughts." He began to suspect that the hatch was not just a relic, but still active. A conduit, a transmitter. James's research led him to a retired engineer named Walter Griggs, who had worked for the contractor in the early 70s. Griggs refused to speak on record, but allegedly confirmed that Echo Chamber had tested resonance chambers designed to manipulate brainwaves. He warned James to stop digging. "They don't erase files," he said. "They erase people." James recorded the conversation, but the tape was damaged, filled with static and distortion, as if something had interfered. The deeper James dug, the more resistance he encountered. His emails were blocked. His phone line developed strange interference. He began receiving anonymous letters, blank pages, except for a single phrase typed in red: "You were never meant to know." He installed surveillance cameras around the house, but they frequently malfunctioned. He suspected tampering. He suspected surveillance. He suspected that the experiment hadn't ended. It had simply changed form. One of the most disturbing revelations came from a map James had annotated. It showed Marlow Creek and surrounding areas, with several locations circled in red. These included his home, the local elementary school, and a nearby power substation. James believed these sites were part of a network, nodes in a larger system designed to test behavioral influence on unsuspecting civilians. "We're not residents," he wrote. "We're subjects." Elaine, too, began to experience symptoms. She reported migraines, memory lapses, and vivid dreams of being observed. Sophie's drawings grew darker, figures with no faces, rooms with no doors. Ben stopped speaking altogether for several days. James documented everything, convinced that the family was being exposed to something unnatural. "It's not radiation," he wrote. "It's resonance. It's rewriting us." The government connection wasn't just theoretical, it was personal. James discovered that the original deed to their property had been transferred through a shell company linked to the contractor. The records were incomplete, redacted, and riddled with inconsistencies. He believed the house had been chosen deliberately, that his family had been selected, that their lives were part of a continuation of a classified program that had never truly ended. When investigators revisited the land records in 2025, they found that several documents James had referenced were missing. Entire files had been purged. The contractor's name had been erased from county archives. Even the building permits for the Holloway home were suspiciously vague. It was as if the house had appeared out of nowhere, approved, constructed, and sold with minimal oversight. The deeper they looked, the more the paper trail dissolved. And so, the theory gained traction. The Holloways hadn't just vanished. They had been silenced. Not by chance, but by design. Their home wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. And the experiment, buried beneath their feet, may have never stopped running. The photograph found in the box, grainy, faded, and unsettling, showed the Holloway family standing in front of a small wooden cabin deep in the woods. It was the last known image of them, and it wasn't taken in Marlow Creek. Investigators traced the landscape in the background and eventually identified the location. A remote stretch of forest nearly 60 miles from their home, on land that had once been government-owned, but was now unmarked and unpatrolled. The cabin wasn't on any map. It was as if it had been built to be forgotten.